My grandmother left me $200,000, and before the estate was even settled, my brother had already spent $47,000 of it. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He just assumed that because I was the youngest, because I was single, because I didn't have a mortgage or kids in private school, the money was somehow communal property with my name temporarily attached to it. My mother called it keeping it in the family. My sister-in-law called it an investment opportunity. My father said I was being dramatic. And when I told them no, clearly, finally, without apology, they told me I'd lose everything that mattered. So I let them define what mattered. Then I made sure they understood what they'd actually lost. I wasn't expecting the inheritance. My grandmother, Nana June, had been careful with money her whole life. She clipped coupons until she was 81, kept a ledger in a spiral notebook, never bought anything she couldn't pay cash for. When her estate attorney called me on a Thursday afternoon in October, I was sitting in the break room at work eating a sad desk salad and scrolling through apartment listings I couldn't quite afford. He told me the number twice. I thought I'd misheard. $200,000. I didn't cry happy tears, though I'd imagined I would if something like this ever happened. I just sat very still and stared at the linoleum floor. I thought about Nana June's hands, how they always smelled faintly of hand lotion and coffee grounds. I thought about how hard she'd worked her whole life and how deliberate this felt, how she'd chosen me specifically, left me something separate and specific in her will. My brother, Trent, found out that same evening. I'm still not sure how. I hadn't told anyone. He calls me at 7:30, which he never does. Trent calls when he needs something. That's just the pattern we've had since childhood. He was warm and laughing and asked how I was doing, really doing, like someone performing the concept of a caring older brother. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing. Then, casually, like it had just occurred to him, "So you heard from the attorney today?" My stomach dropped. "Yeah," I said. "That's amazing, Lynn." He exhaled, long and slow, like he was savouring something. "Nana really loved you. She really did." I didn't say anything. "Listen," he continued. "I've been talking to Gwen. We've got this opportunity, a real estate deal, a rental property up in Asheville we've been watching for months. We could bring you in as a partial investor. You'd be a co-owner, build equity. It's a smart move, especially for someone your age." A pause. "It's 245, but we could structure it so you're in for just 75, and we cover the rest." I'd had the money for 6 hours. I told him I needed time to think. He said, of course, no pressure. His tone said otherwise. That night I lay in my apartment, ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, and I thought about how fast it had moved. Not even a full day. Nana June's signature was barely dry on the estate documents, and already my brother was calculating percentages. I thought about what Gwen had said once at Christmas, offhanded, laughing. Trent's always been the family's best financial mind, and I thought about what my mother had said when I got a raise at work last spring. "That's wonderful, honey, but don't let it go to your head. Money changes people." I haven't changed. They had just revised their expectations of me. I went to the bank the next morning and opened a new individual account, separate from the joint savings I shared with my parents for the family vacation fund we'd been contributing to since 2019. I moved everything into it, changed the login, set up two-factor authentication. I didn't tell anyone. 2 days later, my mother called. "Trent mentioned the Asheville property," she said, her voice doing the soft thing it does when she's about to say something she knows I won't like. "I think you should really consider it, Lynn. He's done his research. It's a smart investment." I haven't agreed to anything. "Nobody's pressuring you." She paused. "But you don't have a house. You're renting. You don't have children yet. That money could do something real if you used it wisely instead of just sitting on it." There it was. I didn't have a house. I didn't have children. Therefore my financial security was left legitimate. My savings were surplus. My future was a rough draft, and everyone else's was the final version. I got off the phone and sat very still in my kitchen for a long time. The group text started 3 days after that. My mother, Trent, Gwen, and my Aunt Phyllis my father's sister, who had no stake in any of this but had always treated family business like a community event. The thread was titled Family Matters, which should have been my first warning. By the time I was added, they'd already been talking for 2 days. I could see the scroll of messages above my own name, all of it moving fast and warm and certain. Trent, she just needs to understand this is for her too. This is how wealth is built. Gwen, exactly. We're not asking her to give anything away. It's an investment. My mother, she's always been cautious. But I think if we frame it right, she'll come around. My Aunt Phyllis, sometimes the youngest need someone to show them the way. That's what family is for. I read it twice. Then I screenshotted it and sent it to my friend Cassie, who was one of the few people in my life who hadn't suddenly developed opinions about my inheritance. With no comment, she replied, "They've been doing this without you and calling it for you. That's not family. That's a board meeting." She wasn't wrong. The pressure moved faster after that, which is how I knew they could feel the ground shifting. My mother started texting me articles about real estate returns. Gwen sent me a shared Google Doc titled Asheville Property, Lynn's Potential Stake, with a formatted spreadsheet full of projections. My father, who had been mostly quiet, called me on a Sunday and said, "Your brother works hard. He's trying to do right by this family. I hope you appreciate that." I said, "Dad, he's asking me to fund his investment." My father said, "There you go, making it about money." I put the phone down and didn't pick it up again for the rest of the day. What nobody knew, what I hadn't told any of them, was that I'd already made an appointment with a financial advisor. Her name was Dr. O.C., and she had an office downtown that smelled like fresh coffee and competence. I bought the estate documents, the numbers, and a list of my own goals, pay off my student loans, create an emergency fund, eventually buy a home on my own terms. She looked at the numbers, looked at me and said, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you use this." I know that sounds obvious, but when you've spent your whole life as the youngest, the quiet one, the one who goes along to keep the peace, someone saying that out loud to you can feel like a window opening in a room you didn't realize had been sealed shut. Trent called the following Friday. His voice was different this time, still warm but thinner, like warmth applied over something harder underneath. "We need to put a deposit down by the end of the month," he said. "The seller's getting other offers. I haven't agreed to invest. Lynn." A long pause. "We're family. We're not strangers off the street. I'm your brother. I'm trying to build something here that benefits all of us. The least you could do is meet us halfway. You've spent the last 2 weeks building a plan around money I never offered, because we knew you'd come around eventually." He said it like it was obvious, like my objection was a weather delay, not an answer. That sentence sat in my chest for days after. Because we knew you'd come around. Not we hoped. Not we thought maybe. We knew. They had counted on my compliance before I'd given it. My silence in the early days had been read as agreement. My reluctance had been treated like a negotiating position rather than a no. I called Cassie that night and said, "I think I've been trained to be agreeable and they're panicking because the training is stopping." She said, "Yeah, and they're going to get louder before they accept it." She was right about that too. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I got a voicemail from my Aunt Phyllis. It was long and meandering and circled around the point 3 times before landing. She'd heard from Trent that I was being difficult, and she wanted me to know that our grandmother would have wanted the family to work together. June was generous, she said. She didn't hold things back from the people she loved. I think you know what she would have wanted. I sat with that for a while. Then I thought about Nana June's spiral notebook. How she tracked every dollar. How she told me once, when I was 16 and upset that I had to get a part-time job while my friends didn't, "Lynn, no one takes care of you the way you take care of yourself. Make sure you're always the one holding the keys to your own door." She hadn't left me that money to fund my brother's real estate portfolio. She'd left it to me. Specifically, deliberately, to me. I called my mother and told her clearly and simply that I would not be investing in the Asheville property, that I had no plans to change my mind, and that I would appreciate it if the family stopped discussing my finances as though they were a shared resource. There was a silence on the other end of the line that stretched long enough to become its own kind of answer. "You've changed," my mother finally said. "I've decided," I told her. Thanksgiving arrived the way it always does in my family, loud and warm on the surface, with something cooler moving underneath. I bought a sweet potato casserole because that's what I always bring. I sat at the same chair I've sat in since childhood, at the right end of the table near the window. Everything looked the same. But by the time we were passing the rolls, I could feel it. The way Trent didn't quite meet my eyes. The way Gwen smiled at me a beat too late. My Aunt Phyllis talked more than usual, filling silences that hadn't existed before. Halfway through dinner, my father set down his fork. "I think we should talk," he said, "about the property, as a family." Everyone went quiet. I looked at the green beans on my plate. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "I've already told Trent my answer. We thought you might have reconsidered." This from Gwen, her voice careful and light. "Now that you've had more time." "I haven't reconsidered." My brother leaned forward. "Lynn, be reasonable. We're talking about $75,000. You have 200. You won't even feel it. It's my money, Trent. It's the family's money." He said it quietly, like it was just a fact, like gravity. And there it was. I'd been waiting for someone to say it plainly. I looked at him for a moment, then at my mother, then at my father, who was studying his plate. "Nana June left that money to me," I said. "Her name is on the estate documents, my name is on the account, and no one else at this table has any legal claim to it. I'm not asking for a debate. I'm telling you I'm done discussing it." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd experienced in a long time. My Aunt Phyllis started to say something about gratitude. Gwen started to say something about family loyalty. Trent pushed back from the table and walked into the kitchen. I finished my green beans. I ate a roll. I had a second slice of pie. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We're very disappointed in you. I hope you understand what you're doing to this family." I read it at a red light. Then I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove the rest of the way home in the dark. What I didn't tell any of them that night, what I'd been sitting on for 3 weeks, was that I'd found the charge already. A month earlier, I'd gotten an odd alert from a credit monitoring app I'd set up after the inheritance came through. A hard inquiry on my credit file from a mortgage lender in Asheville, North Carolina. I hadn't applied for any mortgage. I spent 2 hours on the phone with the credit bureau and the lender before I understood what had happened. Trent had submitted a co-borrow application for the property. He'd listed me as a co-applicant. He'd used my name, my social security number from an old joint tax filing we'd done 3 years ago when he'd done me a favour, helping me with my taxes and my estimated net worth, which he'd calculated using the inheritance. He hadn't asked. He hadn't told me. He'd just done it. And the lender had processed the initial inquiry before anyone caught it. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the documentation printed out in front of me. I thought about calling him immediately. I thought about screaming. Instead, I made a list. Calmly, methodically, the credit bureau dispute form I'd already filed, the lender's fraud department contact, the attorney I was about to call in the morning. My attorney's name is Mr. Hadley. He has an office 2 blocks from my apartment, and he speaks slowly and precisely, like he measures every word before it leaves his mouth. When I laid out what had happened, he looked at the documents for a long moment. "This is fraudulent use of your identity," he said, "regardless of the family relationship." "I know. How do you want to proceed?" I thought about Nana June's spiral notebook. I thought about holding the keys to your own door. "I want a cease and desist letter sent to my brother," I said. "And I want the credit inquiry formally disputed and documented. And I want a record of everything." Mr. Hadley nodded. "Do you want to pursue it further than that?" I thought about it. "Not yet, but I want them to know I could." The cease and desist letter arrived at my brother's house on a Wednesday. I know because Gwen called me at 11:30 that morning, her voice stripped of every bit of careful warmth it had held for months. "You hired an attorney," she said. "Yes, against your own brother, against someone who used my identity to apply for a mortgage without my knowledge or consent." A pause. "He was trying to make it easier. He thought if the application was already in motion, you'd just go along with it." I let that sit for a moment. He thought if the application was already in motion, you'd just go along with it. Like I was a door he only needed to push hard enough. "Tell Trent not to contact me directly about this," I said. "All communication goes through Mr. Hadley." I hung up before she could answer. My mother called that evening, then my father, then my Aunt Phyllis. I let them all go to voicemail. I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and my cat, Benny, curled against my knee, and I listened to the voicemails only once. My mother was crying. My father was controlled, but cold. My Aunt Phyllis said the word betrayal 4 times. None of them mentioned what Trent had done. Not once. That was the moment I understood the architecture of it clearly. It wasn't just that they'd wanted my money, it was that they had genuinely believed they were entitled to it, that my objection was the problem, that my refusal was the wound they'd all be recovering from. What Trent had done, the identity theft, the fraudulent application, was just him being resourceful in their version of events. My response was the crisis. I opened my laptop and started drafting something I'd been thinking about for weeks. A boundary letter. Not legal, not aggressive, just clear. I addressed it to my mother, my father, Trent, and Gwen. I laid out what had happened in plain, specific language, the group text they'd had without me, the actual application, the cease and desist, and then one paragraph at the end that said, "I love you, but I won't be attending family events or responding to family communications until there is a direct, specific acknowledgement of what happened and a genuine conversation about how this family handles my choices going forward." This is not an ultimatum, it's a boundary. There's a difference. I sent it on a Sunday night. Then I muted every family thread and went to bed. December was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I worked. I had dinner with Cassie. I took a weekend trip to Charleston by myself and walked along the waterfront for 2 hours without my phone. I went to my financial advisor and finalized a plan. Student loans paid off by spring. A 6-month emergency fund established, a down payment fund that would let me buy something on my own by the time I was 32. I didn't hear from my brother directly. I heard from my mother, once. A card that arrived in the mail, handwritten, careful, that said she missed me and hoped I'd come to understand why everyone was just trying to help. It was sincere in its way, I think, but it still couldn't see the thing. It couldn't see that helping without asking isn't helping. It's just a quieter kind of taking. Christmas came and went. I spent it with Cassie's family, who fed me too much pasta and let me sit by the fire and not talk if I didn't want to, which is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. January brought 2 things: a certified letter from Mr. Bohr, Hadley confirming that the fraudulent credit inquiry had been removed from my file, and the lender had closed Trent's application, and a text from Trent himself that said only, "I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry." 6 words. I read them 4 times. I thought about everything that had come before them, the months of pressure, the group texts, the Thanksgiving dinner, the forged application, Gwen's phone call, the voicemails. I thought about how long it takes some people to say a true thing versus how long it takes them to build a comfortable lie. I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I heard you." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was just an acknowledgement that the words had landed, because I'm not interested in erasing people, only in protecting myself from versions of them I can't trust. In February, I did something I'd been thinking about since the fall. I made a donation in my grandmother's name to a women's financial literacy nonprofit in Charlotte. Not a huge amount, just $5,000, but enough to fund a full year of their debt management workshops. I listed it under June's name and asked them to send the acknowledgement card to my address. When it arrived, I set it on my kitchen windowsill next to a small succulent I'd bought myself. I'd been keeping that succulent alive for 3 months. That felt like something. I started a journal around that time. Nothing structured, just a place to put things I was working through. Some days it was practical goals, timelines, budget notes. Other days it was messier. I wrote about the night I'd read those group texts and felt the floor tilt. I wrote about my father's face at Thanksgiving, how he'd looked at his plate when things got hard. I wrote about Nana June, her lotion and coffee-scented hands, the spiral notebook, the way she'd looked at me across the kitchen table when I was 16 and said what she'd said about holding the keys to your own door. I wrote, I think she knew. I think she looked at this family and she knew, and she left that money to me, not because she loved me more, but because she understood what I would need to face and wanted me to have something solid beneath my feet when I did. I don't know if that's true, but it helps me to believe it. My father called on a Saturday in March. Not a text, not a voicemail he expected me to screen. He called 4 times until I answered, which told me something had shifted. I owe you an apology, he said, before I could speak. I sat down slowly. What Trent did wasn't right, he continued. I knew that when I found out and I didn't say it. I was trying to keep the peace and I kept the wrong kind of peace. I'm sorry for that. I didn't say anything for a moment. My father is not a man who apologizes, not because he's cruel, but because he was raised in a family where you moved forward, not backward, and apology felt like backward. This cost him something. I could hear it. Thank you, I said finally. We talked for 40 minutes. It wasn't fixed. That's not how this works. Not in one phone call, not in 1 month. But it was real. And real is enough to work with. Spring arrived with new light through my apartment windows. My student loans were gone by April 15th. I celebrated by buying a really good bottle of wine and drinking it slowly on my balcony with Benny on my lap, watching the street below. Nobody came to the party. Nobody needed to. I found an apartment I loved. A small place in a neighborhood I'd always wanted to live in, with a real kitchen and a bay window and a landlord who responded to emails promptly. Not a house yet, but a door I held the keys to entirely on my own terms. I signed the lease without asking anyone's opinion. I moved in on a Saturday in May, carrying boxes up 2 flights of stairs with Cassie, who brought a bottle of champagne and a fern she said was nearly impossible to kill. The fern is on the windowsill now, next to the succulent and the acknowledgement card with Nana June's name on it. My brother and I are not where we were. I don't think we'll ever be exactly where we were, which is fine because where we were wasn't actually good. It was just familiar. We've had 2 real conversations since his text, cautious and careful, finding the shape of something we might be able to build going forward. I'm not in a hurry. Neither is he, I think. My mother and I talk on Sunday evenings now. She's learning, slowly, that asking is not the same as pressuring and that my choices don't mean I love her less. That's a long process for a woman who's been the centre of her family's logistics for 35 years. I'm patient with it. Not infinitely, but enough. I went back to Nana June's grave in April. It was a clear day, cold still, the kind of cold that feels clean rather than brutal. I brought tulips because she always grew them in her backyard, the stubborn kind that came back every year without asking. I didn't say anything out loud. I just stood there for a while, thinking about spiral notebooks and hand lotion and the specific, deliberate kind of love that looks ahead and plans for what someone will need, not just what they're asking for right now. Then I drove home, made coffee, and got back to work. The keys were in my hand. They had been all along. It just took a while to stop letting other people tell me which door to open. I keep coming back to one moment. Not the Thanksgiving dinner, not the cease and desist, not even the morning I found the fraudulent credit inquiry with my name on it. I keep coming back to something my grandmother said to me when I was 16, sitting at her kitchen table, upset about something that felt enormous at the time, and now I can't even remember. She looked at me and said, "No one takes care of you the way you take care of yourself. Make sure you're always the one holding the keys to your own door." I didn't fully understand it then. I thought it was practical advice about money, about renting versus owning. It took my brother using my social security number on a mortgage application for me to understand she was talking about something much bigger than real estate. The thing about what happened with Trent is that it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a pattern. one I participated in my whole life without realizing it. I was the youngest, I was the quiet one. I went along, and somewhere along the way, going along became the role my family expected me to fill permanently. When Nana June's money arrived and I stopped going along, they didn't see a person asserting her rights. They saw a malfunction, a piece of the system that had stopped working correctly. That's the part I had to sit with the longest. They weren't entirely wrong about who I used to be. I had trained them, without meaning to expect my compliance. Every holiday I attended, even when I didn't want to. Every opinion I swallowed. Every time I chose peace over honesty. I was building something, and what I built was a version of myself they could count on to never say no. When I finally said no, it felt to them like a betrayal. But the only thing I had betrayed was their expectations, and those expectations were never fair to begin with. What I've come to understand is that doing the right thing, what I'd call real integrity, isn't always the loud, dramatic thing. It isn't screaming at Thanksgiving. It isn't a viral moment. It's the small, invisible act of opening a separate bank account on a Tuesday morning when nobody's watching. It's making an appointment with a financial advisor instead of crying into the phone. It's documenting instead of reacting. Because you understand that clarity is more powerful than outrage. That requires a kind of clear-eyed thinking that nobody teaches you, especially not in families where keeping the peace is treated like a virtue. I had to learn it on my own, in real time, while the people I loved were on the other side of the argument. That's not easy, I want to be honest about that. There were nights I second-guessed every single thing I'd done. I wondered if I was being cold. I wondered if Trent was right, if I was just hoarding. If my grandmother's money sitting in an account I refused to share was its own kind of selfishness. And then I'd remember, he used my name without asking, and the doubt would pass. The thing that carried me through, more than anything, was the willingness to stay the course even when it cost me. Even when my mother cried. Even when my father went quiet in a way that hurt more than his anger would have. Even when Christmas came and I wasn't at the family table, staying the course when everything in you wants to give in just to make the discomfort stop. That's what actually builds a life, not the big dramatic gesture. The quiet, daily decision to hold your own ground. Nana June held her ground her whole life, softly, without anyone noticing. She kept a spiral notebook, she paid cash, she built $200,000 out of ordinary days and ordinary discipline. And then she handed it to me like a baton. I'm still running. I intend to finish.